Bookcase TV is brought to you in part by Café Tallulah, Digital Film Academy,
Oui, bien sûr, je comprends, Monsieur le Président. Oui, bien entendu. On va tout faire notre possible pour vous retrouver votre chapeau. Oui, oui. This was the French president. He sounded very unhappy because apparently he went for lunch and someone took his hat. Comes a bit with the theme of this week we're going to be talking about. There will appear to be a French invasion of writers, more precisely, where a lot of French-speaking writers are coming to New York, speaking into English. Also, strange things like a lot of Anglo-Saxon, American, English writers speaking about French things. So what are the French things? Is there more to the French than just simple, exquisite cuisine and superb wine and cheese and high fashion? Well, we're going to find out, and for this we're going to send our favorite and most faithful investigator who is going to go down the street and try to find the president's hat. So welcome back to Bookcase, and my next guest is actually a French citizen, going by the name of Antoine Laurain. We wrote a book, a funny book, The President's Hat. And unfortunately, he did not bring the hat with him. So what happened to the hat?
You have to read the book to know what happened to the hat.
Okay.
Yes.
So this hat, it's not anyone's hat, it's the president's hat. François Mitterrand?
Yes.
Mitterrand, what did he say?
Mitterrand.
Yeah. Why Mitterrand? Why not de Gaulle's hat?
Because as you are French, you remember the President Mitterrand. It was a kind of iconic picture. You know, Mitterrand used to wear a black hat, then a red scarf, and a black coat, and sometimes a black Labrador dog. Okay. So that was interesting to do something with those items.
Yes. But so you could have done a story about the scarf or the dog, but you did not. You did the hat.
Yeah,
yes.
I prefer the hat.
Okay.
That was more interesting.
So it's an allegory. The book, I could say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why giving power to the hat?
Because I think a hat is the item the more closer than your brain, you know,
okay.
It's very, very near your head. So that's interesting. Maybe something of your cleverness can stay in the hat, you know, a sort of DNA. And maybe if you got the hat, you can have the power.
The power. Do you think the hat makes the person?
Is the hat really powerful or not? Is a question for it's the reader to make his
decide.
To decide, to make his own opinion about.
That's an easy answer out.
Yes,
yeah.
it is.
So the story, if you get in a nutshell, what's the story?
The story starts in the 80s. We are in 1986 with a very ordinary man. He works in an office. His day wasn't very good because he had some problems with his boss, and he decides to have a very good dinner in a French brasserie, to eat oysters and.
He eats a lot of oysters.
Yes,
nice.
Yes, that's important in the book. Oysters and white wine, and so he has his dinner in this brasserie. Then man comes into the brasserie and get a table very near Daniel, because his name is Daniel. And this man is not an ordinary man. He's the French president. So Daniel is very impressed. He's taken aback to be so close to the French president. Yeah. So he tried to listen what the president says to his friends, and it's a huge moment for him. And at the end of the dinner, the French president forgot his hat, so Daniel decides to pick up the hat and to keep it. Yeah. To keep it. And the day after, he put the hat on his head, and things begins to change for him. He decides to stand up in front of his boss. He get a promotion and everything is okay, but he forgot the hat in a train. Then a young woman pick up the hat, and she's in a bad moment of her life with a love affair with a married man, and the hat's gonna help her. And that will be the same with the two others' character in the book. And of course, at the end, the hat is back to his real owner, the president.
But so Daniel knows the hat comes from the French president, so he can give power to the hat even if it doesn't have them, but the woman does not.
No, Daniel is the only one to know who belongs the hat.
So how do you write? You outline everything, or you just do you fly on by the system of pens?
No, you have to know exactly what the story gonna be. So it's not writing like this, but I try to write every day, but it's not always possible.
How do you get started as a writer? The first novel is just like getting fed up with the screenplay, or getting nowhere, or it's too hard? Or...
No,
it's a tough business.
I had several lives. So after the screenwriting, I was the assistant of an antiques dealer in Paris.
Okay.
So during many years, and that was a very, very interesting job. And I wrote my first novel in the store. You know, and
in the store, okay.
In the store.
In the spare time, yeah.
Yes. And then after, I have tried to find a publisher, and it works.
Did you read the book in English?
Yes.
What did you think? Was it weird to read yourself in English?
It's a very, very good translation from the French novel.
Did you improve your English for reading your own novel?
I'm improving my English, as you can hear. My English
is
fantastic. My English is very bad.
Do you feel like when you switch languages, the subtleties, the jokes, or even the cultural precepts are different? Are lost in translation?
No, not at all.
Not at all?
No, not at all. All the jokes you can have in the French version of the books, you can find it again in this one.
Why doing a story that not too many people would care about, but you felt like you had to write it?
I was lucky enough to have an amazing French teacher at my school when I was 16. Okay. He was an Englishman, actually, and he's still alive. And he enthused a class of 16-year-old somnambulant British boys with the story of Charles Baudelaire and the central mystery in Baudelaire's life, which was his relationship with the woman he called his Black Venus, that we know as Jean Duval.
Duval, yeah. Why was that story important? I mean, how does that relate to you?
Let me explain how he woke up, this group of young kids. He said, here was a woman who was a drug addict, who was an alcoholic, who slept with all Baudelaire's friends and many strangers around him, and yet he remained with her for 20 years. Mm-hmm. Why did he do it?
That's a very good question.
And we all sat up and said, well, what's the answer? And he said, you are going to have to find that out. I want you to read about Baudelaire, read the poetry, and that way you'll find out. And many years later, I think I have found out. When he died in 1867,
he was
unknown, his work was out of print, his publisher was in jail.
And he was bankrupt.
Absolutely bankrupt. He owed a lot of money. And his work was damned as fantasies, pornographic, the work of a madman. It's astonishing what was done to him in his life. And it took about 25 years before an English poet, actually, Algernon Swinburne, and Baudelaire's friends, particularly Manet, before they resurrected the reputation of a man whose body lay, as it does now, in the cemetery of Montparnasse.
How were you transformed through the process of doing the research and the writing, of getting to know him in different ways?
How was I transformed?
Yes.
Well, I wasn't transformed, but I just came to admire what he did more and more. But I mean, one has to say about Baudelaire, he was a very contrarian character. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a man who would love to dress as a dandy and put on fine clothes and boots, and yet he would spend his nights in the brothels of the left bank.
Yeah, sure.
And he delighted in the company of prostitutes. Quite apart from anything else he may have done there, he liked talking to them. This was a man who despised the Paris mob. He thought they were ignorant thugs, basically. Yet in 1848, he was on the barricades with a looted musket. trying, as it happened, to shoot his stepfather, who was commanding the
That's right, I read
government
that,
forces. Really, if I was fascinated by any character in this story, it's by her, because we don't know really very much about her. And the reason I wrote a novel rather than writing a history was to tell her side of the story, which I had to do with my own imagination and getting into her mind. And it's my premise, my belief, that although history has damned Jean Duval as a wanton and a slut, actually she was much more clever than that, and she understood with her emotional intelligence the wellspring of his genius, which lay in those childhood years with his mother.
I read that in the book that a lot of responsibility was put on her.
Yes.
Yes, and
completely.
I blame her. But he seemed to be taking no responsibility whatsoever for his behavior. And that is, I don't know, by today's standards, it's a bit shocking, right? It's like a man goes down the gutter and poor him.
Baudelaire was shocking.
Yeah.
He was shocking both in the way he lived his life, which was utterly irresponsible, and which caused misery both to his mother and to many of his friends who had to keep bailing him out, and to his publisher. But that is the price you pay for genius sometimes.
Yeah, you don't think it has nothing to do with being caught in that trip of romanticism? Like you couldn't escape it, or you just wanted to live to the full?
Baudelaire despised the Romantics. One of his great, he broke with the Romantic school of literature.
Oh, okay.
He thought their formulaic verse was just old-fashioned, and he despised the way that nature was so central to the Romantic movement. And that's why he was a very, in my view, modern man then, and remains a modern man now. I mean, it was W.H. Auden who said that what Baudelaire did in his poetry was to write the biography of modern man, which is quite a statement. In his poetry, Baudelaire essentially refused to accept the general goodness of man, which was the great belief in the 19th century, and said that in the human heart he found nothing but vice and sorrow and evil. And his poetry is about evil and how you can redeem yourself from it only through suffering, was Baudelaire's view.
That's right, which is a very Christian theme.
Well, this is that you put your finger on a fascinating thought, really, and premise. Baudelaire was actually a moralist. He wasn't a Christian in that he believed in the afterlife or in the consolation of forgiveness, but he regarded himself as a moralist. Sure. And nobody was more surprised in 1857 than he when his book, Les Fleurs du Mal, was seized by the government and 6 poems were deemed to be obscene. Having damned 6 of the poems as obscene, they then seized the whole first edition and destroyed it. So in fact, they damned the whole book as obscene. I mean, that was extraordinary. At the very end of his life, he said, I have had only 2 responsibilities in my life, one to my art and the second to my Black Venus. The book is a fiction novel. It is a novel, yeah. Why was it important to write a fictional rendition of Jean's life, as opposed to do a proper bio, for example, since you have so much at your hand? Because we don't know enough about Jean Duval. There's not enough material between the 2 of them? There's an argument about where she really came from. Yeah, most historians where she was born think Haiti. We don't know how she died. In my book, I have developed a theory about that. So I decided to create her side of the story. Chris Launois. Yeah. Or how you say an American accent? Launois. How would you say it?
Well, in gym class you'd say Illinois, but
Illinois, okay, but
the full name is Chris Pan Launois.
Launois, okay. Who is the son of John Launois, the photographer, reporter, who pretty much covered the entire world in the 60s and 70s.
International photojournalism.
So the book was never finished, correct? Or?
The last chapter I had to do on my own in the epilogue, but it started when everyone was telling me you have to write your memoirs because he's had like an adventurous life. One day I went to Liechtenstein, where he was living at the time, and I just said, okay, just tell me the story and I'll write it down. Tell me verbally and I'll write it down. And that was the first chapters. Very difficult to do with your father. He was born a Frenchman in extreme poverty, or high struggle during the pre-World War II and during the war. Yeah, he was like 11 years old when the Nazis invaded France.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, his father believed that if America got involved to fight the Nazis, that there was a hope for freedom. They would listen to the BBC radio, even though you weren't supposed to, and break the curfew or whatever. And he just fell in love with America because these GIs came in and liberated for 4 years. They were under Nazi occupation. It's a boy who fell in love with America and then became an American.
So that story, and it's not quite a fairy tale. I mean, the beginning was tremendously difficult.
Oh, yeah.
Because he went to California first.
He met Joe Payson. He called him Monsieur Joe. He was a life correspondent, journalist. He met Joe, and he became his assistant for 2 months out in France. And my father's dream was to go to America and write poetry, and go across the land. And Joe said, that's not really realistic. Maybe you should take a look at these Life magazines. And he gave him a stack, and he went through it and inspired him and became his mentor to become a photojournalist.
The story goes all around the world, covering all these different types of stories, which is interesting because of what your description of your father, seeking justice and the unfairness of life and social.
Because of that poverty and because of that class system.
And he spent his whole life documenting that.
Well, it drove him.
What sort of man was he like in private?
He was very his own man. I mean, he could drive people crazy, and people would love him at the same time. And he was the kind of guy. He was an honest man.
Among these all these assignments, would you know which one you liked best? I mean, what he was most proud of?
Well, two: the Beatles and Malcolm X. Those are the two stories.
Yes. Tell us about the Beatles story.
The Beatles story?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a fun shoot, I was told.
And the poster, we have the 4 Beatles on the threshold of something looked like 10 Downing Street, wearing bowler hat and sort of a capitalist shooting.
They're basically making fun of the establishment while becoming part of it.
Yeah.
And the Beatles loved the idea. Brian Epstein, the manager, was not so happy about it, but the Beatles loved it.
Yeah. Any memories from Malcolm X?
I love that story about Malcolm X. It's because Malcolm X, at the time, he was going to Egypt, to Mecca. John was warned, be careful and expect a hostile encounter because he said he hates the white man for what they've done. And so John's waiting for him, and Malcolm X at 1 in the morning, he finally comes to John's hotel, and John opens the door and puts out his hand, and Malcolm X doesn't shake it. And so they come in, and then they're talking a little bit, and, call me Malcolm, he says. And then Malcolm X, they start talking about oppression of people, and he says to my father, well, you're just a New York liberal who doesn't understand anything about oppression. And then my father tells him his whole story about 4 years of oppression in Nazi-occupied France. And then Malcolm X says back to him, 4 years of oppression, that's a long time. Imagine a lifetime. And then that was the first time that Malcolm X smiled, because he understood there was some connection about rebellion, against oppression. And then they just went out, spent the whole day taking photographs, the famous one where he's looking at the camera and at the mosque, and then they had dinner together. And at the end, Malcolm X said he had to write a letter to his wife, Betty Shabazz, and when they said goodbye, he gave the letter to my father saying, don't mail this. Bring it back to New York. I don't trust the mail, but I trust you. And so it was like a changeover almost. Like suddenly he's seeing there's the trust between a white man and a black man. And he learned that there were white Muslims too out there in Egypt. So he was just going through a transformation. But then, a few months later, he was assassinated in February. Of 65.
Any regrets in his life? For example, he thought he probably should have done more, or he didn't do enough, or what he did had an impact.
I never asked him if he had regrets. I mean, we all make a lot of mistakes in this life, so maybe he did.
The world is a big place, full of mysteries. What sort of mysteries? That's up for you to decide, because everyone has a different opinion what a mystery is. But if you talk to the French people, they will tell you the world is full of mystery, because they think they're here and they are there, they are almost everywhere at the same time. To solve this riddle, we went down to the Mysterious Bookstore. in Tribeca to find out really what sort of mystery can there be there. What sort of mystery do the French people write? Do they have a different mysterious genre over there? Maybe I can be here and there at the same time and everywhere in between, and only the Mysterious Bookshop will reveal if it's true or not. So come with us. You are the manager of the Mysterious Bookshop.
Correct.
And we are in Tribeca in New York. What do you think is the resurgence of the thriller or the crime genre? What does it bring to people, you think?
Well, I think the thriller, at least, is a real escapism. I mean, you're rooting for, whoever your hero is in many cases is the lone gunman or the lone hero, your Jack Reachers, your Jason Bournes, right, yeah. And to put yourself in that character's shoes and to go up against these amazing odds, you have a shadowy organization filled with people after you, and somehow you're going to travel all over the world using fake passports and survive. That sort of thing I think appeals to a lot of people. And as does the mystery too. If you were a single amateur detective solving a crime in a small town, that also appeals to people, but it appeals to different kinds of people.
Well, we did not encounter too many French people in the bookstore, but we certainly discovered that there's a lot of mystery going on in the Mysterious Bookshop, and that can be there and here and everywhere in between at the same time. You see how easy it is? So welcome back for this French Flair Picks of the Week. The first book I'd like to start with is satire. Actually, it could be also a fable about the French state of affair, but it's called The Suicide Shop. Somewhere between the Rodal middle grade type of fiction for children and the Addams Family. It deals with the store owner who opens a very thriving suicide shop and helps people, as you can guess, to depart this life. But things takes a different turn when his wife gives birth to a joyful son. They lose that grimness and life takes an unexpected turn. So, very funny, The Suicide Shop by Jean Telet. Since we've been talking about what was the French invasion in New York, so let's go back to Paris now and talk about the mastery of the art of French eating by Anne Ma, who actually talks about fine cuisine. It's a very interesting book about a woman who's getting an assignment. She's a journalist, Anne is a journalist, gets an assignment in Paris to do some writing, but when she's there, her husband gets sent to Baghdad, and then she's left alone. So what she's going to do? Well, things she's always wanted to do to fight her loneliness, she goes into the French trenches of the back kitchen, and she learns how to do the most complex andouillette and rillettes and crispy buckwheat pancakes, which we call crêpes in French. So the mastery of art of the French eating, the subtitle, Lesson in Food and Love from a Year in Paris by Anne Ma. The next book, it's about New Orleans, and what has this to do with the French? Well, if you meet a French person, they will always remind you that once upon a time, New Orleans was French. And then Napoleon decided otherwise. And I've never been to New Orleans, but I'm sure if I went there, the people from New Orleans would tell me, we are French. So anyway, this memoir by Peter M. Wolf, New Orleans Gone Away. It's a memoir of lost and renewal. It's actually a very touching memoir about sixth generation of a Jewish family and the one of Peter M. Wolf, who has to leave New Orleans to discover his roots. And it's done in a setback in the 1950s. Pre-Katrina, obviously. So great lesson in history, in architecture, and the town itself. New Orleans Gone Away by Peter M. Wolf. And the last book, and not the list, because it's monumental, but The Tigers Are at Home by Jean-Marie Blas de Roblet. It's actually, if you have time to invest, it's a fantastic read, but it requires time because it's 900 pages or close to it. And it's basically a story of a man living in Brazil who discovered an unfinished biography by some 17th century scholar called Anastasius Kircher. And as this hero, whose name is Eleazar von Wogut, tries to solve the mystery of this 17th century scholar, his family, his life falls apart. His wife take off to do some archaeological research in Mato Grosso. His daughter leaves school to be with a lesbian lover. And Eleazar von Wogut loses his sanity. Nonetheless, it is a fantastic read. Pre-Médicis in French when I came out last year, Where the Tigers Are at Home, Jean-Marie Blas de Roblé. And this concludes our French Flair. Now, if you're not sure whether the French are still invading New York or not, well, you have a problem, because they certainly are very, very, very present.
And cutting.
What was it like for you to talk to an American audience that the book has been translated?
That was very interesting for me, because
life is not perfect. Mais non, Monsieur le Président, pas du tout, vous vous trompez. Il faut que je passe...
I love being on Bookcase TV.
Oui,